Hello everyone. Today we're going to look at what is going to happen if white is going for the Italian game and is going for some rare options or Qe2. So let's start. How are we arriving at Italian game? First of all, white is starting with a e4. We're replying with e5, the classical approach. On knight f3, targeting the pawn on e5, the most common move. We are replying with knight c6, defending the pawn. And even though here more aggressive option is bishop b5 going into Ruy Lopez or Spanish, bishop c4 is pretty more solid. I mean, not so ambitious, we can say, as the Ruy Lopez, also because there are so many openings which can be a weapon against the Ruy Lopez, that some players don't want to go into that. For example, Berlin or Marshall. So that's why some players are choosing going rather for with a bishop to c4, developing it to c4, and going for the Italian game, for the slow game, gioco piano, a quiet game. And basically, what we want to do here, if we're black, definitely there are a few moves. One of the main moves is bishop c5, just continuing the development, and yeah, basically just accepting this quiet game. Our move which we are going for is knight f6. This variation is called two knights defense. So instead of going for more solid approach, developing the bishop, we're going for the knight f6, entering all kind of right lever variations and so on, because we are not afraid. We don't really want to get those very even positions. We want to get some fighting chess, some fighting positions, and immediately we're challenging the pawn on e4, developing the knight at the same time. Of course, very good move. The kind of the small drawback, what we can say in comparison to bishop c5, is that knight g5 is possible now, which would be a fried lever, which would be discussed also later. But in this case, here we're going for knight f6, just developing, and here we are going to discuss some rare options which white has at this moment. So definitely the question for white is how to defend the pawn on e4, what to do, and defend at all or not, because one of the moves is not really doing anything about it. Let's first start with something which can transpose, for example, like move d4. D4 move is just transposing after e takes d4 to the Scotch Gambit chapter. If we remember, knight f3, knight f6, knight f6, d4, we take, and bishop c4, we transpose there. In case white goes for knight c3, well, then there is this trick which is working out. So knight c3 defending the pawn feels like logical move, but it's not working out, because after knight e4, knight takes, there is a d5, and again we're transposing to the four knights game, and the chapter with g3 and other rare moves. So it's not working out. Let's look at some other options which could be played, starting with c3. Well, first of all, c3 is doing nothing against defense of the pawn on e4, and surprisingly, it was played in over 600 games. I mean, of course, c3 is generally a move at some moment in this kind of positions to go for the d4. But in this particular case, it does nothing against the pawn on e4, and basically let us take it, and we're capturing it with happiness also. And the next move, we are threatening to go with d5, targeting the bishop and defending our knight on e4. So here there are a few moves. For example, bishop d5, relatively the best move, but because of looking at this move and saying it, okay, it's one of the best moves, we can understand that c3 is actually pretty dubious. So we have to go back, or white is taking, winning back the pawn, bishop d6, developing with a tempi. Now d4, castle, and in the next move we are ready to attack the pawn chain, the pawn in the center on d4 with c5. At the same time, knight is going to be pressured. We have two pieces out already. The bishop is going to come out. The next, we have definitely slightly better position. In case of d4 in this position, so white is trying to say, okay, I gave up e4 pawn, but I pushed forward with d4. We're going for the d5 tempo, attacking the bishop and defending the knight on e4. Bishop b5, then we are just grabbing on d4. Knight takes, creating some unpleasant ideas on c6, but after bishop b7, everything is defended and we're just up a pawn for now compensation as for white. In case of queen e2, which would make probably the most sense, which attacks the knight and also at the same time putting pressure on e5, but we have d5 again defending the knight and attacking the bishop. After bishop b5, which is of course the best move here because it creates a pin, it's pinning the knight and at the same time threatening with the knight to take on e5 to put more pressure on the knight on c6. So here we defend and develop at the same time, bishop d6, defending the pawn on e5. d3, white is trying to kick out the knight from e5. And here we go knight f6, we are going all the way back. And after knight e5, I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. I hope you found it. It's just normal castle. Just removing the king from the e-file, finishing the development. We won a pawn, now we gave the pawn back. And basically, the thing is that white won back the pawn, but the whole activity of the pieces, and I mean, there are some problems white has to solve. So if white takes on c6, we take with the pawn, rook b8. We're going to have a rook joining the game on the 6th rank. Also, at some moment, there is going to be rook e8 after rook b6 is played, and bishop will be in kind of a trouble. White still has to solve some issues with the development of the queen side. For example, after castle, next moves rook b6, bishop a4. And now we are having a very nice move, bishop h2. The Greek gift in this position is working out. In the next moves, we're having knight g4 and queen h4 incoming to checkmate. That was a c3. Now we're going for castle. Okay, castle is another way which is ignoring take on e4, and with the idea of after knight e4 to have rook e1. We're grabbing a pawn because we're not really afraid of a rook e1. We're going to see that. Okay, knight c3. First of all, knight c3 is going to transpose to the 4 knights game because here we're taking on c3, dc, and we're playing h6, and we're going to transpose there. In case of bishop d5, which we already seen the move a move ago, we go back with the knight again. Bishop takes the knight to recapture back the pawn to win it back on e5. dc, knight e5. Now bishop d6, again, we're developing and targeting the knight at the same time. d4 defending, and now we go for bishop e6. We are ready to castle long side already, and we can play very ambitiously because of that. We can push for c5, play queen e7, long castle, and try to target the pawn on d4, as well as the king on the king side. So this was bishop d5. In case of d4, well, here we have to be a bit more careful. Again, we cannot really take because we would open up the e-file, which would be very bad. But we have this very nice d5 move. That's the whole point. That after taking on e4, d5 is a threat. So we are defending the knight. We are ready to develop our bishop from c8 and also attacking the bishop at the same time on c4. Bishop goes to b5, very logically putting pressure on e5 pawn. Now we could take, because there is too much pressure on this pawn, we take. In case knight takes on d4, we have bishop d7. We have similar position, and we actually transpose to the Scotch Gambit chapter. So here, in case of queen takes d4, then we have queen d7. Very interesting move, but we're breaking the pin with this move. Now, knight d4 is a threat, so queen has to go. Queen goes to a5, putting more pressure on the c6 square. But now we're playing knight c5, attacking the queen. We're up a pawn. Of course, we're down, like we're behind the development that's visible. But we are ready to play bishop e7, finish the development by castling in the next move, and just enjoy an extra pawn with a slightly better position. Queen e2, here we react to the same. d5, we're just going for it, attacking the bishop and defending our knight on e4. Bishop b5 is pinning our knight, also creating a threat of taking on e5 with the knight. Bishop g4, we are pinning knight on f3 as well. Well, here, in case of c4, What is white's idea is, of course, to break the defender of our knight, and that's why it's a very good move, considering that our king is in the center. But we are playing just bishop e7, d3, which is attacking our knight, knight c5, knight c3. White is trying to attack our center, but we are kept grabbing now on c4 since there is no knight on e4 any longer. And after take, we just castle. And basically, we managed to keep the pawn on e5, which remains an extra pawn. And, well, we're just getting a clearly better position here. Knight c3 immediately. First of all, the main idea of this move is to trick us, because it feels like that we can take a knight on c3 and then try to castle like or play bishop d6 very quickly, but it's not really working. The problem of it is that there is a spin on our knight, so this pawn is actually can be taken by the queen with a check and then recapture the knight on c3. That's why we cannot take it, but we take the knight on f3. We're trying to keep an extra pawn because we can do it. Like, it's, of course, it's more materialistic approach, but if we're not getting in any trouble, why not? Queen takes on f3, knight f6, we are returning back, defending on d5, queen e4, queen e2, now targeting e5 again, but after queen d6, everything is defended, we are ready to long castle, and we're just keeping an extra pawn for no compensation. d3, which is attacking our knight on e4, of course, we have to do something here. If we just go back, there is going to be again the same problem. Queen would take on e5, so we have to take on f3 again. If queen takes on f3, we can go just back with knight on f6, queen g3, attacking the pawn on e5 again. We're having queen d6, defending the pawn on e5, and then the next move we're going to go for the long castle, and we're just having a good position and extra pawn again. In case pawn takes on g3, first of all, no, on f3, sorry. First of all, it compromises the pawn structure, it weakens the pawn structure of white. But of course, now we are forced to move the knight, so we go back with knight to d6. And our idea is that even though we allow queen e5 check, we are attacking the bishop on b5. So if bishop takes on c6, pawn takes f4. Okay, white could take on e5, but white rather prefers to take on e5 with the pawn to fix the pawn structure. We go for bishop e7, fe, and knight f5. Well, looking at the material, of course, we gave back the pawn, but looking at the king and the missing g-pawn, we can say that position is clearly better for black since we have more chances for attack. Queen e5 check is another move we have to consider, of course. It's a strong move. Now we have to stop the check with a queen. Queen e7, but the other pawn is hanging. Queen d5, white is capturing material, wins an extra pawn, but the position of the king and pawn chain is not really so good. So we're taking then bishop on b5, queen b5, and long castle. And we are going to try to use the position of the king, since there is not a single defending piece there. We will bring the queen to e6, potentially bringing to h3, bishop to d8 to create threats on h4, bring the knight to d4, and so on. So we're having for sure a clearly better position, since we can attack the king in the next moves. So now going for the rook e1 move, which is actually the most common move, but it's pretty bad. So after rook e1, we have d5 again, attacking the bishop, defending the knight. Now, if bishop goes to b3, we have bishop c5, and we actually don't have problems. Rather, white is the one who has problems on f2. So bishop b5 looks logical, keeping the same idea of pinning this knight, removing the defense from e5, and targeting the pawn on e5. So we go bishop c5 again, attacking the pawn on f2. So there is a threat, of course, from white to take on e5, but we also created a threat ourselves, so we counterattack. d4 looks very logical to stop the attack on f2. We're taking the pawn. In case of knight bd2, which would just be developing move, which is attacking our knight on e4, we would castle knight e4, de, rook e4, and after queen d5, we're just managed to keep an extra pawn on d4, and we're having just very comfortable advantage. In case knight takes on d4, which is, of course, feels very logical since white is putting pressure on the knight on c6, we castle, bishop c6, knight f2, because, of course, like if knight takes, then there would be bishop f4, f2. So bishop c6, now we have intermezzo knight f2 move, Because the thing is that actually it's not possible to take the knight. Since after king f2, there is queen f3 check, attacking the knight and the king at the same time. King g1, queen d4, take, and we're just going to grab the last piece on c6. At the end of the line, we're going to have 2 extra pawns, and white is going to have trouble with development, but we'll have the bishop pair advantage, which is just amazing. So that was the c3 move. Now we're going to look at the that was the castle move. Right, that was a castle move, not. Now we're going to go into the main line, which is a queen e2. So what is the main idea of the queen e2 variation? First of all, is defending the pawn on e4, but other than that, it's not doing that much. So what is white saying? Queen is on e2, white wants to white wants to defend the pawn, and at the same time prepares for the c3 d4 push, so that white doesn't want to spend time on playing d3, but rather just plays queen e2, because queen could be more useful probably on e2 than on d1, but actually white is going to transpose to the lines with d3 at some moment anyway, so this is not going to help that much white. So now we are ready to play bishop c5. We're developing. We're putting the bishop on the most active square, and because we have time, because white spanned this move for queen e2. So now there are a few moves from white. Of course, there is a move which doesn't really make so much sense, d3. So since white already played queen e2, d3 doesn't really make any sense, defending the pawn again. But okay, it's also opening the bishop from c1. We just castle, and rook e8, and we're going to discuss this variation via the 5th move, castle, just in a bit. In case of the interesting piece sacrifice, bishop f7, it looks pretty tempting for white, but it's actually not working out. We're already fully developed. We're not afraid of it. So king f7. So the main idea is, of course, queen c4, taking back the bishop on c5. We're going for d5. Of course, if white is taking on d5, we managed to save the bishop, so that's why d5 is possible. Now, queen takes. We're taking with a knight on e5, on e4, targeting the queen on c5. Now, queen has to go back, and after rook e8, basically we have a very strong center. King is going to artificially castle after the next move of king coming to g8. We're having just a great position, and white position of the white is still a bit problematic, and white will still have to find a way to develop those pieces in the next moves. So in case of the castle, we are of course castling as well. d3, again, like looking at this coloration of the move queen e2 and d3 doesn't really make sense. If you want to go for d3, then you just play this move without spending time on queen e2, but okay. Rook e8, very logical move. First of all, not only we're defending the e-pawn to push for the d5, but also we're creating a tiny little thread. But okay, it's not really tiny, but it's a thread of coming with knight to a5 and not winning the bishop, but trading the bishop for the knight, which is, of course, would bring us to the bishop pair advantage. If knight goes to g5, trying to create some problems on f7, well, it will not work out because we have d5 immediately here. If ed happens, of course, we don't take on d5 because after queen h5, we were going to lose. So it's not working, but we have an intermezzo move knight d4. Now, in case queen goes to d1, we have bishop g4 attacking the queen. In case queen go to d2, then we can go b5, attacking the bishop again. Bishop goes back to b3, and now we play h6, attacking the knight on g5. We're just kicking all the pieces backwards. Knight goes back to e4. We trade the knights on e4 because our bishop was under attack, so we couldn't really do much about it. We traded, and now we're playing a5, threatening to trap the bishop on b3. c3 is the only way to get bishop out from the bc square. But here we have a nice trick. We're going for knight f3, pawn takes, and bishop h3. And we're going to create a mating attack against the king. Why a5 was important? Well, we're going to introduce the rook on the 6th rank, and we're going to help with, we will need it to help us checkmate the king. So that was a very nice idea. Okay, so if bishop takes on d5, then we take the bishop with a knight. If e d5, we take with a queen. Knight c3, queen goes back. Everything is pretty much logical. Queen e4, and here we have queen f5 offering a trade. First of all, we're getting a good position where almost everything is developed, almost every piece is developed. We have a pawn on e5, which also lets us have more space in the center, also a d4 square. There is no problem on f2 any longer, so knight is strange on g5 square. So generally, slightly better position for black, for sure. Queen h5, white uses this moment when the knight is not defending h5 square to try to attack us. Well, but then we return with the knight back. Queen takes on c7, we go back. Queen c4, introducing the ideas of the threat, of the checkmate threat. So we have to play queen e7, knight f7 after king g8. Basically, okay, white can take a pawn or something, but there is not going to be more than that. And well, black is going to win because we are up a piece, sorry. So that was knight g5 move. In case of c3, which looks logical, trying to continue with something like d4, then we're just going for h6, stopping any kind of action on g5. And we're just going to remove bishop to f8 so that there is no attack on our bishop from b4. And we're just going to push for the d5, because one of the ideas how to react on d5 could be b4 and b5 in this position after we push for d5, obviously. So a3 is another option. A3 is like creating a square on free square on a2 for the bishop. We're going with a knight to d4. We're going forward, getting also ready to push for d5. And after knight d4, bishop d4, we're just getting great position. c6 and d5 are our next moves, pretty much unstoppable. So we're having a good position and maybe some slight advantage, we can say. a4. So a4 has no threat in it to play b4, so that's why it's good. It means the square on b4 is weakened, and we can go h6. Again, we're stopping any kind of action on the king side. Knight c3, and now knight b4. Now after knight is on c3, we occupy the square on b4. First of all, we're also blocking any type of knight d5 moves and preparing for pushing for d5. This is the perfect square for the knight on b4 in this variation. That's why we don't jump there just yet, because we would be kicked by the pawn, but we wait for knight to be on c3 and then we go knight b4. Great position for black. We have a clear plan, and the next move we are going to fulfill the d5 idea. So bishop g5 is idea, of course, to pin the knight, to stop all kind of d5 breaks in the center. Then we have to go h6. h6 is our typical move. We're always playing against this bishop move on g5. So here bishop goes back to h4, and knight a5, we're targeting the bishop on c4. And there is actually no good square for the bishop, so we will take the bishop, we'll trade it, get the bishop pair, and we're just getting a fine position. If we are ready at some moment, we can go for g5, but we have to be always careful if there is any sacrifices, but for now it's not dangerous. Definitely we want to go for d5. That's one of our ideas as well. So knight g5 is another move which can happen, but it's a little bit strange because normally knight g5 is definitely better to play immediately, so as a fried lever, but not in this move order, because in this move order it's not really a threat. But there is actually one trick here. So we have to react correctly to this move. If we're just going to not care and play like castle, all right, I defended the pawn on f7, I defended with a rook, with a king, you cannot take it, well, you're wrong. That's actually a trick. What trick is made for? Knight f7. And here, queen e7, we're still holding, we are still better in this position, but we don't need this kind of lines, we don't need kind of jumps out with a check and so on, we don't need it. But rook f7, that's normally how the game goes. Bishop f7, king f7, queen c4. This is a trap which white is looking for. d5 and queen c5, and white is already better up in exchange. So that's why we don't need all this kind of action. We go for knight d4, attacking queen and the pawn on c2 at the same time. We create our forks. We create our forks on c2. So that's why we play knight d4. Very good move. In case of queen d3, then we have already d5. d5 attacking the bishop, and we can go for this break, so it is working pretty well. Pawn takes, and now bishop f5, another attack, and at the same time we're attacking on c2. We're going to win a bunch of material. Since the bishop on c4 is also blocked, there is no longer a threat on f7. Bishop f7 check, trying to go intermediate, but okay, we just go with the king to f8. The problem is again the same. The queen and the pawn on c2 are under attack, and in the next move we're just going to go for h6, kicking the knight out of g5, winning material on f7. Case of queen coming to d3, we just play h6. White is attacking our knight. We take on g4, on g5. Pawn takes on d4, we take on d4 back. Bishop goes back to b3. And d5. Even though white managed to save the bishop in some way, the position is disastrous because we already fulfilled so much that we're already winning in this position according to computer. So bishop, queen c4, trying to defend the bishop so that after we push h6 there is no problem. But after queen e7, again we are introducing the threat of h6 in the picture. b4 attacking our bishop. Bishop b6, a4, we just go for a5. And the next move, we're going to kick the knight out and win the bishop on f7. So absolutely winning for black. So that was a castle. Sorry, that was an knight g5. And now we're going for the main line, kind of c3, which is, of course, the idea of this queen e2, so that not spending time for d3, but immediately going for the d4. But unfortunately, it's not really going to work out so well for for white as they hope for. We're going for castle, first of all. We have to castle. If white is trying to be aggressive, immediately going for b4, trying to gain some space and attack our knight on c6 to win the pawn on e5, well, that's not going really to work out so well because we have an intermezzo d5, we are counterattacking the bishop on c4. In case white is taking our bishop, we're recapturing their bishop, queen c4, and now bishop g4. We're attacking the knight, we're threatening already to break the pawns on the king side. Pretty tough position already for white. Queen goes back to e2 to defend, and now we have knight e7. We are going to recapture the pawn. We shouldn't worry that we've lost the pawn. And the next moves we're ready to open up with f5, the position, and there are going to be some weak squares also for white, like the square on d3. And our pieces are very active, while white's pieces are just doing nothing on the queen side. So what happens in case of e d5? Well, then we go for e4, which is very, very important move. Another counterattack. We have two pieces hanging, but we're attacking the knight on f3 again. Here, knight g5, trying to attack also the pawn on e4. But here we go bishop g4, attacking the bishop. Another attacking move. With every move is that we're developing, we're pushing forward, attacking white. Queen f1, the only square for a queen. There is no other square. Knight e5, now we're also attacking the bishop on c4 and all kind of checks as well. So the question is, what happens in case white is taking our bishop? Because our bishop is actually hanging on c5. Of course, that happens. bc5, white has to check the line. The point is that even though we sacrifice the piece, we play rook e8, and the next move, knight e3, the position looks completely lost for white. Knight e3 is going to be almost, not checkmate in a few moves, but white would lose a lot of material. So how to stop it? The only move, bishop e2, coming back to break the pin and also to allow some squares for the king. We go for knight e3. Of course, taking would be disastrous. So king d1 has to be tried, but after queen d5, we are attacking the knight. First of all, if knight goes back, it's okay, but we are just going to create a winning attack against the king. King is in the center, pieces are not working, absolutely crushing position for white castle can also happen here. Of course, it would be better for white to be a little bit slower in this kind of position, not rushing immediately with b4. So main idea, of course, to bring the rook to d1 and to push forward the pawn to d4. That's the plan. But now we are already fully ready for d5, so we're going for it. And the queen is kind of misplaced on e2. It would be better on d1 and maybe rook on e1. So ed5, knight d5. In case of d3, that would be a better move than the queen. The knight takes e5. But of course, we have a good position as well. Bishop g5, first of all, pinning the knight. And here, good question: what happens after h3? What are we doing with the bishop? Where do we go? Please stop the video and try to find the move. I hope you found it. Of course, we're keeping the bishop on the same diagonal. We want to provoke white to go for d4, and if they're provoked, we're going with the bishop back. And after winning, so to say, winning the pawn on e4, we're stabilizing with c6, defending the knight. We have very, very good pieces. Our king is safe, while white is having some real issues. We are having big compensation for the pawn, and definitely a better, clearly better position for black. Knight b2 d2, trying to defend everything on an f3, not going for the win of the pawn. Now we go for knight f4, targeting the queen and the pawn on d3 at the same time. Our pieces are just amazing. They're just working very, very nicely. We're just dominating in this position. What happens in case of knight d5? That's, of course, that's a critical test, kind of. What happens if white is taking the pawn? But then we have a very nice move, knight f4. The thing is that queen is hanging, but not just hanging, but it's hanging with a check, because knight c6 would work out, but it's a check on e2, so it's not really working out. So queen has to move. Queen goes to e4. We go with queen to h4, creating a threat, very unpleasant. Knight h3. Now d3, white is defending the queen, so knight h3 is not happening, but it's actually still working, because after knight h3, pawn takes, we take, and we grab the knight on e5 with attack on the bishop. Bishop a2, and now bishop h3, grabbing the pawn. Now we equalized materially, but positionally we're so much better due to all of our active pieces. We're just doing amazing, and already according to computer, this endgame is completely winning. We're going to break with f5, introduce our rooks to the game, and win the game. It was a castle. Let's see what happens after d3. But again, d3 is a little bit illogical, because since white's whole idea of this queen e2 move was not to play d3, but now they're playing d3. So it doesn't really bring so much sense, but okay. So now we are ready to go for d5, especially considering that king is in the center. So now the question is what to do here with white. If ed5 happens, then we take on d5, castle, and bishop g4, and we're just going to transpose to the line we just discussed. We are the first castle move, like 6-move castle. So if white doesn't take but plays bishop b3, it looks very strange. Yeah, normally if we are pushing for d5, white has to take. If white is not taking on d5, then something is wrong for white, and everything is great for black. So we're going for a5, grabbing some more space, threatening with the pawn coming all the way to a4, targeting the bishop. In case of the castle a4, we kick the bishop out from this very nice diagonal. It was a very good diagonal. Generally, bishop wants to stay there, but now it's not. And after h6, we are stopping all moves, all knights coming, or bishops coming to g5. Our pieces are more active. We have center, we have d5, e5 pawns. We have moves like bishop g4, rook e8, and so on. So we're just having a very comfortable edge in this position. In case of bishop g5, which would be logical after a5, which would be very logical because bishop is attacking the pawn, the knight on, pinning the knight on f6 and attacking the pawn on d5. So now it's a threat to take on d5. We have to do something about it. And there is no real good way kind of to defend on d5. So that's why we have to take, we're forced to take on e4, but it's absolutely fine. Pawn takes on e4 as well. And now h6, asking the question to the bishop, where do you want to go? So the bishop wants to stay at the diagonal. The bishop wants to keep the pin. And here we go a4. We're attacking the bishop as planned. Bishop goes to c4. And now I would like you to stop the video and try to find the best move for black. So here we shouldn't be worried because we finish our full development and, well, we can pretty much with confidence play g5 and break the pin on our knight and the queen. So the thing is that taking on g5 would not really work out due to the queen d6 and defense, and now the knight goes to h7, kicking the bishop away. We're just up a piece for 2 pawns. The bishop goes back to g3. Bishop is just cut out of the game, but of course we shouldn't forget the pawn on e5 is hanging. But in this position, we go for knight h4 and knight h5. And the problem is now for white that we're just going forward with g4 and queen g5 in the next move, just putting more and more pressure on white. And if white is going to try to do something on e5, well, then there's going to be, of course, a big problem because white is just not finishing the development, not castling. And of course, we're going to have a very good position. All right, that was the bishop g5. So a4 is trying to stop our a5. Okay, a good try. Now we go for bishop e6, defending on d5, threatening to take on e4, and also at the same time pointing out the bishop on b3 is undefended. So this threat has to be addressed. Knight bd2, defending here, defending there. Now we go for h6 again. There is no knight g5, castle, and rook e8. Next move, we're going to bring the rook out to d8 after queen d7, and well, we have again the center in the position. We're slightly better. We are definitely dominating here, not white, so great position for black. If bishop goes away on c2, then we again have we are playing a similar way. We'll play h6, stopping any kind of jumps on g5. We're ready to bring the rooks out to the e and d file. We have a good center, d5 and e5. Also, generally, we can remove the knight from f6 and go for the f5 break if we want to, as well as we can go for knight maneuvers. We are the d7 and c5. So it's just a lot of things what we can do. We can place actually the bishop to e7 as well. It's probably a bit better here because there is no pin anymore on g5, so that there is a square on knight on d7 and coming to c5. Okay, so that was the whole chapter. Now we're going to look through the main ideas and topical moves. This position. So this position was at the very beginning when white gives up a pawn on e4. It's pretty important to understand that there is a threat right now to take on e5. And there is a spin, of course, and of course there is this also x-ray. But what's important to remember, so we ignore this threat of taking, but we create our own threat. We counterattack on f2, developing the bishop at the same time, which is very important and good to remember this idea. The next position is after bishop f7. First of all, it's important to remember that bishop f7 is not good. It's a bad move. It's not really working well. So we have to take it. We're grabbing the bishop, and after queen c4, I think it's also a very important moment that we have this d5 move. And now we're having these 2 pawns after knight e4. We are getting back the pawn, even though we didn't win any material, we didn't lose any material, but our center is just everything. In the next move, we're ready to hide the king on g8, artificially castling it. So that sacrifice doesn't work. Knight g5 after queen e2 is not bringing so much power as it would bring instead of queen e2. So that's why this move is not really working out. But it's important to remember not to get into the trick, not to castle, because it feels like we castle and then we're going to defend it immediately. But then we're actually getting big problem, because after knight f7 takes queen h4, queen c4, sorry, we're going to lose an exchange. So that's why, in this position, that's why in this position, most important to remember the move which we have to play is knight d4, targeting the queen and the pawn on c2. And after queen moves, let's say on d3, then we have already d5. Okay, and if bishop takes on f7, we shouldn't worry. We just kick the knight out of g5 and win material. Okay, the next position. Here, last move was knight takes on e5. White is taking on e5. And basically, this is a critical test. So white is taking the pawn. We're losing a pawn. And the most important, if we're just starting to trade everything, we're not going to do well, because our knight is also going to hang on d5. So here we have to remember for this very nice move, knight f5. Activating all our light pieces. We're threatening to take the queen. Knight cannot take on f6. I wanted to say knight cannot take on f6 on c6. And white has to continue moving with a queen. Meanwhile, we can create attack against the king with bringing the queen out. The pieces of white are still standing on the queen side. So this is a position where we are dominating due to the power of activity of the pieces. The next position is happening after the move, I believe d3 was the move played, which again is not really combining together with the queen to e2, because the main idea was not to play d3. But yeah, it happened. So here we are already finished the development. We brought out some pieces. We are prepared with d5, and king is in the center. So here we don't even have to play rook e8 to defend the pawn, because king is on e1 in the center, and here we are ready to go with d5 immediately. So again, we shouldn't be worried to lose the pawn on e5 in such position. And this was actually the last position which we wanted to highlight. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned today well, studied well, and I will see you in the next chapter.